it's really no secret at this point. Look, Brexit's a complete flop, and a lot of people ask me on my live streams, why can't Labour support Brexit, or at least come out, well, not support Brexit, but come out and say Brexit's a failure. It's failing. It's a massive flop. Well, if Starmer even came out and said that, the Tories would have an absolute field day. Absolutely. They'd be able to run all kinds of attack campaigns, certainly at a general election. They'd accuse Starmer of sort of breaking and betraying the will of the people, even though, as we've said multiple times, the Tories have sort of learned the wrong lesson from the Brexit campaign. People wanted change, but unfortunately, the Tories are doubling down on the exact thing that people sort of didn't want, while at the same time using the referendum as a justification to push some really, really bad economic policies and stuff that no one at the 2016 referendum would have even voted for if that had been the official Leave position. They would have lost by a country mile if they'd seriously put this up as the sort of what the Leave position really was. So it is smart for Starmer to come out and say, look, we cannot, as the Conservatives like to do at the moment, we cannot ignore the EU. The EU is not going anywhere. It is far better to sit down and negotiate them and negotiate some good bespoke agreements. Because we need alignment on a ton of stuff if we are to help any of our industries succeed in the future. That's a fact. That's not going to change. And then after that, Labour and even us, we can go, okay, guys, this is Brexit. This is as good as it's going to get. You've seen that we've done all these deals to align ourselves more closely with Europe. So what was so bad about being in the single market and customs union? Regardless of whatever happens, our path to going back into the EU is guaranteed. That's not in any doubt. It will happen. Yeah, it might take some time, but it will happen. So today we're going to go diving into this question of why can't Labour really start to talk about how Brexit is a failure, and why, again, how Starmer talking about doing deals with the EU is far, far better than saying that outright. So today we're going to go jumping into this article, but before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So over we go to this. This comes from The Guardian with the title of "Brexit is a flop, and the voters know it. So why can't Labour call for a closer bond with Europe?" The idea ought to be too obvious to need repeating, but Labour has been known to ignore the inconvenient truths of economic management. So Keir Starmer was right to assert in his speech to the Liverpool Labour Party that the overwhelming priority of the government needs to be sustained economic growth. Without it, Labour wouldn't be able to finance few, if any, of the proposed reforms. So what is more than the optimism, than the accompanying economic growth, is the extent to the promotion of greater economic equality, the socialist aspirations that dare not speak its name. Yeah, 3 weeks before the Liverpool speech, Sir Keir used an address to the Centre for European Reform to reject categorically the suggestion that a Labour government should attempt to negotiate some form of customs union with the single market, as prospect of economic expansion so exciting that even the announcement of the talks were being considered would simulate a sudden surge in capital investment. Sir Keir does not suggest that a new Labour government should or even would end any or all of this residual bilateral agreements with Europe, and I do not underestimate the importance of maintaining the mutual recognition of veterinary qualifications, but as a stimulus to economic growth, it hardly compares with access to the 450 million consumers in the world's largest single market, a prospect that he seems willing to abandon for the strange reason that you, quote, cannot win back the trust of those who have lost faith in politics if you are constantly focusing on arguments of the past. In fact, inconsistency does far more damage to political reputations than the stubborn refusal to abandon long held convictions. Labour's pronouncement on Brexit is wrong in principle on one year on and promised to make Brexit work the next time. It is hard to imagine how leaving the EU can be, quote, made to work, but the majority of Labour voters at the last general election wanted Britain to remain. It is not even working for many convinced leavers. And I admit there is a gaggle of Brexiteers so fixated on the idea of sovereignty for sovereignty's sake that, quote, taking back control is an achievement in itself for which they are prepared to pay an economic price. But most supporters for the withdrawal behind the belief that Britain alone and free would enjoy an economic boom. Now they know better. And according to the Organisation for Economic Co-cooperation and Development, the UK economy will stagnate next year, which means that during the Brexit years, the British economy, which until then had grown faster than the economies in 6 of the world's most industrialized countries, will in 2023, and they recorded the slowest growth of all those G7 nations. The promise was that all the economic damage of leaving the EU would be more than reflected by the new trade deals, which would follow our withdrawal. So far, 3 treaties have been signed or are in prospect. The agreement with Japan is virtually identical to that one we have enjoyed through the EU, and we have remained a member. Whatever making Brexit work means, it would be a waste of time. Brexit is a flop, and voters know it. The opinion polls show that both increasing regret the way that we left the EU and mounting disapproval of the way that the government has managed the withdrawal. This is not a time for Labour to talk about making Brexit work. It is a time to expose the failure and offer a radical alternative, a closer working relationship with the EU. That is not to argue that the outcome of the 2016 referendum can be ignored. Democracy demands that it be respected, notwithstanding the fraudulent claims made by the Brexiteers. But the decision of a one-day referendum cannot determine a nation's long-term destiny, as Brexiteers must agree. Otherwise, they would have to accept the argument ended in 1975, when Britain voted by more than two votes to one to remain in the customs market. In any event, today the European argument is about partnership, not membership. No doubt Boris Johnson will lie about Labour's true intent as he lied about getting Brexit done. But the majority of voters who believe a word he says will be convinced of Labour's true intention by the way in which the party pursues a new relationship with Europe. Britain has chosen to be what the EU calls a third country, and siren voices in Brussels will argue against doing a bespoke deal with a nation that has turned its back on full membership. But there are still several influential voices in Europe who say that an EU without Britain is incomplete. They need to be reassured that a new Labour government will want closer ties. Switzerland has treaty rights within the single market and has come very close to making it a full member. But Switzerland is special because of its size, because of its banks, because of its historical neutrality. Britain would have to give something in exchange, and the first concession would have to be an agreement to a measure of European immigration into Britain. And of course, the heckles rise at the mere mention of that subject. But unless we accept some immigration as part of the bargain, we will never sign a new free trade agreement, and it is taken for granted in every negotiation, as it was in the dissolution of the deal with India. It also falls to Labour Party to keep the flame of European unity burning bright in Britain. Fortunately, that is possible to combine support for that with the noble aim of partnership with a hard-headed economic policy of promoting trade and increasing growth. The party's annual conference is just coming up in a couple of months away, and good Europeans should, in a fashionable phrase, make the most of it. And I sort of agree with him here, and that's obviously Roy Hattersley, again, a former bigwig in the Labour Party. I really do sort of agree with him. Britain needs deals with the EU. And, as we've said, the bizarre fantasy many of the Brexiteers had was that Britain would sort of, literally sail off into the like the Pacific somewhere, and we could just ignore the EU. But that's not possible. That's not going to go away. And there were a very, very small, and they are a very small minority, that sovereignty for sovereignty's sake, damn the economic damage. That's a very, very small group of people. The more large group of people were convinced by the leave argument that leaving would not do any economic damage. But that economic damage is going to be very, very plain on sea for all to see. During the non-Brexit years, when we were in the EU, our economy grew faster than a lot of other, G7 countries. This year, for the first time, its first proper Brexit year, was stagnating. Now, a lot of that is, of course, going to be blamed on the pandemic. It's going to be blamed on the Ukraine-Russia war situation. But the thing is, those situations are not going to last forever. The further we get from the pandemic, the less they can blame it. Eventually, the situation, in Ukraine will end. Can't blame that after it's over. So I think it is right to push for not full membership, but closer economic ties. That makes a lot more sense. And if that means, wanting more European immigration, then, well, so be it. If that's the price we have to pay, so be it. Far better to have a economy where we can do things with all that growth and that money coming in, so that we can fund all our policies that we want. That's what we want to do. So, I fully agree with Roy there. I'm perfect in agreement with him. That's what we sort of need to do, not what we sort of need to push for. So, and that's, I think, what our eventual sort of path will be. And eventually, people will just go, well, hang on a moment, why aren't we full members at that point? And that's the path we always said would happen. Yes, we would get pushed away for some time, but eventually, the economic argument would always win back through. That it didn't make sense to sort of tear ourselves away so hard from the EU. Eventually, government, whichever, either a Labour or even a Tory government, would have to admit that it does need stronger and closer ties with the European Union to help economic growth. And then eventually, of course, once you start doing those, well, then there's no reason to stop doing more, because again, if that encourages economic growth, well, there's no reason not to do more deals. And then, of course, the answer becomes, well, why aren't we in the single market customs union? Why aren't we full members? It is literally just a matter of time. It really, really is. So yeah, as always, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And of course, please do remember to hit that like and share button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and our invitation link where you can, well, buy me coffee, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So as always, we'll see you all next time.